Stop babysitting the gauges, Dawn. You're obsolete, Rick Halverson said from the grated mezzanine above press line 4, loud enough for every operator in Bay A to hear. And the words hit harder than the turbine whine climbing through the morning air. The line had not even reached full manifold pressure yet, and he was already performing for the crew like safety was theater and schedule was law. At 6:17 on the Monday before quarter close, Riverbend Forging Complex smelled like hot steel, wet concrete, and hydraulic oil warmed overnight in the reservoir loop. Dawn Cooper stood at the startup panel in her arc-rated jacket, with her hard hat clipped tight, left hand over the pressure enable key, right hand resting near the emergency stop mushroom. Press line 4 sat in front of her like a city block made of steel. A 4,500-ton hydraulic press, twin intensifier pumps, 40-inch ram, servo block manifolded into 6 zones, and a furnace preheat lane feeding die sets in timed sequence. 23 workers were already inside the hazard envelope between staging, die prep, and transfer rails. She knew where each one stood because she had assigned the startup positions herself. The startup checklist on her clipboard was half-checked in black ink, one line circled in red. Upstream flange at servo manifold, visual anomaly during pressurization ramp. Dawn did not circle lines for style. She circled lines when physics had already started negotiating terms. She watched the pressure trace rise in clean increments. 480 pounds per square inch, then 700, then 930 as the first pump settled and the second synchronized. The hiss near Zone 2 had changed pitch since her pre-shift walk-down, thinner and sharper than normal bleed noise. At 5:42, she had also logged vibration drift on the B-side pump bearing, only 0.3 above baseline. Not enough for an automatic lockout. Enough for a serious operator to stay suspicious. Then she had scanned the manifold with a handheld thermal imager and seen the thing that tightened the back of her neck. A knife-thin cold line slicing across one 6-bolt flange. Cold because compressed oil was expanding through a defect and taking heat with it. "Rick," she called without turning, because her eyes stayed on the leak point. "I'm holding at ramp. We have a live flange leak upstream of the servo block." Bootsteps clanged down the mezzanine stairs. Halverson moved fast when numbers were threatened. He wore a spotless white hard hat and a clean navy shell jacket with the company logo still bright at the zipper seam, as if he had walked in from a brochure instead of a forge floor. He stopped beside her, looked once toward the manifold, and gave the quick, dismissive grin she had seen in budget meetings. "That is mist," he said. "Condensation and atomization from startup turbulence. Turn the pumps." "It's not condensation," Dawn said. Her voice stayed even because panic made people sloppy. "It's a pinhole jet through a compromised spiral wound gasket. We isolate, depressurize, break flange, replace gasket, torque sequence, then pressure hold with witness. No restart until that is done." He laughed, short and sharp. A few heads turned from Bay C. "Listen to this. We're behind 14 hours and she wants a full flange break over a little fog." Dawn kept her eyes on the plume. Under the bay lights it looked delicate, almost pretty. A faint fan no wider than a hand. She had taught this exact illusion in training. Low-pressure leak wets surfaces. High-pressure leak aerosolizes and can penetrate tissue. At these pressures, the danger did not look violent until it was already inside someone's glove. "I'm tagging red," she said and reached for the lockout card. Halverson stepped closer until his shoulder nearly touched hers. Do not embarrass me in front of my floor. This is not about embarrassment. It is when you freeze production at quarter close. She clipped the red tag through the control key guard with a practiced motion, wrote the timestamp, and initialed it. The snap of the plastic tie sounded small in that huge bay, but several operators heard it and straightened. Procedure had a sound and people trusted it. Halverson's jaw tightened. Coward. The word sat in the air. Dawn felt the crew absorb it in silence, the way a room absorbs a dropped tool and waits to hear whether it cracked. She had been called rigid, expensive, old school. Coward was new. It was also strategic. In plants like Riverbend, no insult was random. Each one targeted a pressure point. Call a specialist coward and you reframe restraint as weakness. Call safety delay and you make recklessness look like initiative. She looked at the flange, then she looked at Halverson. At 1,850 pounds per square inch, mist can inject through leather, nitrile, and skin. I am not turning this line. He threw a hand toward the panel. You make $132,000 a year to start presses, not write ghost stories. She met his stare. I make $132,000 a year because I can hear failure modes before they become injuries. A forklift beeped in reverse near Bay D. Somewhere behind them, a chain hoist clicked against a rack. The ordinary sounds of work continued, and that continuity made the confrontation feel even sharper, like the whole plant had split into two timelines occupying the same floor. In one timeline, she followed procedure and lost 40 minutes. In the other, she obeyed ego and gambled with flesh. By 6:24, the haze at the flange had widened by a few inches, no longer drifting randomly but drawing a visible arc with each pressure pulse. Dawn pointed to it. Look at the pattern. It's synced to pump stroke. That is not ambient moisture. Halverson did not look long. You're lazy this morning, that's all. You don't want to push through startup with the maintenance backlog. A laugh came from near the die cart, uncertain and quickly swallowed when no one joined. Dawn recognized the two maintenance techs standing 10 feet away, with torque tools still in their cases. They were waiting for instructions that would decide whether they worked on dead metal or live pressure. Both avoided her eyes. Mark this as supervisory override if you want, Dawn said, but I will not clear the startup. He leaned in, finger jabbing toward her badge. Do your job or get off my floor. She did not move. Her pulse climbed, but her hands stayed steady. My job is to keep this floor from becoming a trauma scene. Drama, he corrected. You mean drama. She turned to the nearest radio handset on the panel and keyed channel 3. Control to maintenance lead. Press line 4, startup paused on red tag pending leak isolation and flange service. Repeat, red tag active. Halverson snatched the handset from its cradle and cut the transmission with his palm over the mic. Not another word on open channel. The power move was not subtle. It was meant to show ownership of voice as much as ownership of machinery. Dawn had seen the pattern in other managers. If you control the narrative, you can postpone accountability. But pressure systems kept their own records in scorched paint, bent steel, and medical reports. He handed the radio back with deliberate calm, the calm of someone deciding to escalate. You know what I see? I see someone who hasn't adapted. Obsolete procedure worship, obsolete attitude, maybe obsolete operator. The phrase struck a deeper nerve than she expected. 16 years on press hydraulics had given her scar tissue in strange places. She could absorb shouted orders, clipped budgets, broken promises, and still work methodically. But obsolete touched identity. She had trained half this floor. She could diagnose a cavitating intensifier by sound through ear protection. She had sat with new hires and shown them photos of injection injuries that began as pinpricks and ended with surgery, because nobody believed just missed could carry that much energy. She had earned authority the hard way, through uneventful days that never made headlines. "I am not obsolete," she said quietly. "I am current on every revision from the state code and OEM bulletin." He spread his hands toward the crew as if presenting a case to a jury. "Hear that? Code lecture. While customers wait." No one answered. Eli Navarro, the junior relief operator, stood near the rear console with his lunch pail still in hand, eyes moving from Dawn to Halverson to the white vapor fan at the flange. He had good instincts and not enough seniority. Dawn saw him swallow. "Eli," Halverson called, "you ready to run a press, or are you afraid of mist too?" Eli hesitated. "I can run it, sir." Dawn turned to him. "Do not touch that panel with live leak present. You know the protocol." Halverson cut across her. "She is suspended from controls, pending review. Effective now." The sentence landed with official weight because he spoke it in the administrative tone reserved for write-ups and terminations. Dawn felt heat rise behind her eyes, not from shame, from anger at the manipulation. He had skipped every technical point and gone straight to hierarchy. On paper, that move could sideline her expertise in 10 words. She unclipped her operator key from the lanyard, set it on the panel ledge, and kept her posture square. "Document that suspension with reason code and timestamp." He smirked. "Happy to. Reason code, refusal to execute." "Add full context," she said. "Live high-pressure leak at manifold flange. Red tag applied by certified startup lead." He did not reply. He looked past her to Eli. "Take station." Dawn stepped back exactly 2 paces out of control reach and into witness position by the yellow floor stripe. Her throat felt dry from the oil haze. The hiss from Zone 2 had sharpened again, now a thread-like whistle cutting through pump harmonics. She checked the wall clock. 6:31. Shift had barely started, and the day was already balanced on 1 managerial decision and 1 fragile gasket. Halverson faced the crew and spoke with clipped confidence. "We are restarting. This plant does not stop for nervous superstition." Dawn did not answer him. She watched the flange, watched Eli's hands hover above controls he had no business touching under those conditions, and felt the insult settle into something harder than hurt. Obsolete. Coward. Lazy. 3 words meant to shrink her judgment. 3 words that would not change pressure, metallurgy, or fluid dynamics by 1 decimal point. Physics did not care who held the title. Physics only waited for the command signal. Eli's fingers settled on the soft keys, and Dawn saw the smallest tremor in his right wrist before he masked it by bracing his forearm against the console edge. The panel glass reflected his face in fractured strips of green status lights and amber permissives. Halverson stood half a step behind him, close enough to crowd his breathing, close enough to make hesitation look like insubordination. The pumps were still in hold, the manifold sitting below operational threshold, and the leak at the 6-bolt flange kept whispering into the bay to that fine razor hiss that never belonged in normal startup acoustics. She listened the way she had learned to listen after years in high-pressure rooms. Not for loudness, for texture. Healthy pressurization sounded broad and muscular, like a steady roar behind steel. A pinhole at rising pressure sounded narrow, surgical. A high note cutting through larger machinery like a wire pulled tight. She had heard it in training incidents, in archived failure recordings, and once in person at another plant, where a technician ignored it and spent months relearning how to grip with his left hand. "Hold it pre-charge," Dawn said, projecting toward Eli, not toward Halverson. "Do not ramp past 1,000 until maintenance verifies isolation zone." Halverson answered for him. "He is not taking your instructions." Dawn did not look away from the flange. "Then he is taking physics instructions." No one laughed this time. Even the forklift traffic near Bay D had thinned, drivers choosing wider routes to avoid the startup envelope. The leak fan had started as a faint veil under overhead lights. Now it showed a defined edge, a curved feather no condensation plume ever kept at that consistency. Condensation drifted with ambient flow. This plume pulsed with pump stroke and pressure ripple, in lockstep with system demand. That pattern was diagnostic by itself. She stepped to the side rack, pulled her handheld thermal camera from its holster, and raised it toward the manifold. The display painted the flange in false color. Most of the line showed stable warm tones from circulated oil, but one seam glowed as a thin cold filament, a minus delta streak running from the gasket, spiral toward open air. Rapid expansion cooling, concentrated at one defect path. She clicked capture, time-stamped it, and saved the frame under line 4_start_0629. Halverson noticed the camera and gave a flat smile. "Collecting art now?" "Collecting evidence," she said. A maintenance tech finally moved in, torque wrench in hand but still in standby stance, shoulders angled between two orders. "What do you want, Rick? Live snug?" "Quarter turn on top pair," Halverson said. "Just seat it." Dawn turned hard at that. "No live torque on a leaking pressure boundary. You know that." The tech looked at her, then at Halverson, then down at the wrench, as if the chrome could answer. "We can't guarantee load distribution under pressure," he said quietly. "Bolt stretch won't track true." "Quarter turn," Halverson repeated. Dawn took one step closer to the yellow stripe, still outside control reach, and kept her voice level so everyone could hear every word. "At this pressure class, uneven live tightening can warp flange faces, crush one side of the gasket, and open the leak path on the opposite arc. You do not fix a pinhole by gambling bolt preload under stored energy. You create a wider path and less warning." Eli's eyes flicked to her and back to the panel. The status tree rolled through startup prompts. Reservoir temp in range. Return filters nominal. Interlocks green except leak alarm channel still unacknowledged. That channel mattered. Riverbend had installed aerosol sensing near the manifold after a minor ignition 5 years earlier. It looked for persistent particle density and hydrocarbon signature drift in the immediate envelope. Dawn watched the indicator at the top right of the panel shift, from advisory yellow to intermittent red, reset, then red again. Not stable enough yet for auto trip. Stable enough for a competent operator to stop on principle. She pointed at the screen. Aero sensor is chattering red. Halverson dismissed it with a wave. That detector false trips whenever humidity spikes. Humidity does not synchronize with pump stroke. The maintenance tech still had not touched the flange. His knuckles were white around the wrench grip. Halverson's patience thinned into command voice. Do it. The tech knelt anyway, more obedience than confidence, and Dawn saw the mistake before metal moved. He was lining up on the upper right bolt, while the leak origin sat lower left, meaning any live increment would bias compression toward the wrong quadrant first. She could almost draw the stress map in air. Gasket winding, already compromised, would take asymmetric crush, then rebound, then shear where the spiral had begun to split. Stop, she said sharply. If you touch that under pressure, you stand in line of fire. He froze with socket just off the nut. The phrase line of fire changed posture across the bay. 2 operators near the transfer rail took 2 steps backward without being told. Eli shifted his left foot away from the console base, as if he had just noticed how exposed his forearm was beneath the cuff. Language mattered when it named the real geometry of hazard. Mist was vague. Line of fire was measurable. 30 seconds passed with no one moving. Pump pre-charge hummed. The leak hiss sharpened another fraction. By 6:36, Dawn smelled the oil more strongly. Not the heavy reservoir odor, but the lighter, metallic note of atomized droplets hanging in warm air. Atomized oil behaved differently from pooled oil. It traveled farther, coated faster, and found ignition sources people forgot were hot because they were always hot. The furnace preheat lane to the right sat at several hundred degrees surface temperature along shield gaps and scale discharge points. Nobody called those flames. They were just process heat, ordinary and relentless, waiting for fuel and oxygen mix to cross one careless threshold. She keyed her own belt radio, this time on the safety channel Halverson had not locked out yet. Safety desk, this is Cooper at line 4. Active high-pressure aerosol event at manifold upstream zone 2. Request atmospheric spot check and barrier tape expansion to Bay A, North Aisle. Static cracked. Then a dispatcher answered, clipped and cautious. Copy aerosol event. Supervisor authorization? Dawn looked straight at Halverson while she answered. Supervisor informed on scene. Event ongoing. The dispatcher hesitated one beat too long, then said, logging as advisory pending confirmation. Advisory. She had heard that bureaucratic half-word before. It meant someone would open a screen, type a note, and wait for management alignment while hardware kept running. She clicked off and muttered almost to herself, 3 minutes of paperwork and a 30-second risk window. Halverson caught it. You're done speaking on radio. She ignored him and moved her gaze back to Eli. Check your sleeve cuff seal. He glanced down, confused for a moment, then tugged the cuff tighter with his left hand. Good instinct. Not enough protection, but better than exposed skin. Dawn advanced her mental model as she watched the numbers hold around 920 PSI. The failure had likely started with micro chatter at the pump bearing, small oscillations feeding pressure ripple into the manifold. Ripple translated into cyclic stress at gasket interfaces. A spiral wound gasket tolerated some movement, not repeated micro impacts at misalignment. Add deferred replacement. Add possibly imperfect torque history from last service. And the seal stopped being a seal and became a nozzle. When A happened, B built, then C failed. She had explained that chain in classrooms with clean whiteboards. On a live floor, the same chain wore steel boots. One of the older operators near Bay C called out, "Floor's getting slick under the catwalk." Dawn pivoted and saw a sheen developing where aerosol had settled on painted concrete, barely visible until overhead light caught it at an angle. Housekeeping risk had entered the picture. Slip, fall, secondary contact with energized equipment. One leak, multiple pathways. "Cone that area now," she said. Halverson snapped. "Nobody cones anything. We are not shutting movement lanes." The operator hesitated, then grabbed cones anyway from a rack and set them wide, giving Halverson the thin compromise of not blocking the full aisle. Dawn filed that in her head. Small acts of procedural memory still existed on this floor. At 6:39, the panel emitted a short alarm chirp. Eli flinched. The top-line message updated Zone 2. Aerosol sensor persistent high, recommend hold. Not a hard interlock yet. A recommendation only because the system had been configured with human acknowledgement to prevent nuisance stops during seasonal humidity swings. That was the design trade-off everyone bragged about in meetings. Fewer false halts, more operator discretion. Discretion worked only when leadership respected operators. "There," Dawn said. "System is telling you the same thing I told you." Halverson leaned past Eli and pressed acknowledge, muting the chirp. "System acknowledged." "Acknowledge is not correct," Dawn said. "Acknowledge is just silent." The maintenance tech stood up from the flange without touching it, wrench hanging at his side. "Rick, I'm not putting hands there live. Write me up if you want." Halverson stared at him for 2 seconds, then turned away, choosing a different lever. "Fine. Stand clear." That decision sounded small. It carried weight. If maintenance would not perform the shortcut, he would force operation around the defect instead. Dawn had seen that move in incident case files. If one unsafe option met resistance, management selected a different unsafe option and called it pragmatism. A thin stream of droplets now traced down the manifold support and spotted the grating below. Dawn tracked where those droplets might migrate. One branch could reach the cable tray if airflow carried it left. Another could settle onto cabinet seals. Oil on cabinet seals pulled dust. Dust held heat. Heat aged insulation. Delayed failure started that way, quiet and administrative, then arrived weeks later as mysterious shorts and blame games. She raised the thermal camera again and captured another frame. The cold line had lengthened by almost an inch from the prior image. Not dramatic to an untrained eye. Conclusive to hers. Defect growth under steady pressure. Eli cleared his throat. "Sir, do you want me to continue ramp?" Halverson put both hands on the console rail and spoke as if issuing a ceremonial order. "Continue to operational standby slow ramp. We are done debating fog." Dawn felt the crew brace before the machine moved. That was always the tell. Bodies read danger faster than policy did. She stepped farther back to keep her own line clear and lifted her voice so it carried across Bay A without sounding like panic. "All personnel not essential to startup. Clear north side of line 4 now. Move behind marked columns." Several workers obeyed immediately. A few looked to Halverson first, then moved when he did not countermand fast enough. In less than 20 seconds, the densest cluster near the manifold thinned. Better than nothing. Not enough. Eli placed his hand on the pressure ramp selector. Dawn watched his glove, the cuff, the exposed seam near his wrist, where fabric folded when he flexed. She hated that she had time to notice details like that. It meant the bad decision was still preventable and still being made. The pumps answered the command with a deeper growl. Pressure edged up from 920 to 1010. The hiss at the flange climbed with it, finer and harder, no longer a whisper, but a taut thread singing against steel. Dawn's jaw tightened. Technical alarm had moved past interpretation. It was now visible, audible, measured, and logged from 3 independent indicators: thermal anomaly, aerosol sensor persistence, and acoustic pitch shift under ramp. In reliability language, that was corroboration. In plain language, that was the plant being warned 3 times in 3 dialects and ignored in all of them. By the end of that minute, dawn light through the upper clear-story windows had finally reached the far wall of Bay A, turning the suspended oil haze into a pale band you could see from 20 meters away. No metaphor, no fear campaign, no exaggeration. Just droplets in air at high pressure where people had to work. Dawn stood on the witness stripe with her camera in one hand and her radio in the other, and she fixed every number, every sound, every order in memory, because if the line crossed from warning into injury, facts would be the only thing that still told the truth. She keyed the radio again, switched from safety channel to plant operations net, and spoke with the clipped precision she used in certification audits. Operations log, this is Startup Lead Cooper at press line 4, 0640. I am issuing a formal no-start declaration on line 4 due to active high-pressure flange leak at manifold zone 2. Mechanism: likely gasket breach under cyclic load with atomized discharge. Required corrective sequence is isolate, bleed to 0, lockout, flange break, gasket replacement, cross-pattern torque verification, and witness pressure hold at 1.1 times operating pressure. Until complete, restart is non-compliant. The channel went silent for half a second. Then a desk operator answered, cautious and soft. Copy partial, Cooper. Stand by for supervisor confirmation. Halverson stepped closer, jaw tight. Cancel that call. No. The single word came out flat, almost quiet, but it carried. Eli glanced sideways without moving his hands from the panel. The maintenance tech by the manifold lowered his torque wrench and took another step back from the leak cone. Halverson pointed at the pressure trend. You are at 1010 and stable. There is no runaway. There is no rupture. You are creating a shutdown over vapor. Dawn kept her eyes on the flange seam and spoke as if she were teaching a new hire at the whiteboard. At this pressure, a defect does not need to rupture to maim someone. A pinhole stream can penetrate gloves and tissue. If injection happens, damage starts deep and invisible. Add atomized oil in suspension and we now have respiratory and ignition risk near preheat. Stable pressure does not mean safe boundary. It means stored energy waiting for contact. He laughed once, without humor. You memorized the handbook? Congratulations. She turned to face him fully for the first time in that minute. I wrote part of this site's startup handbook after the 2018 manifold fire. You signed the revision. That landed. Not enough to stop him, enough to make 2 operators near the transfer rails go very still. At 6:41, the pumps held a steady growl, while the aerosol plume brightened under a diagonal shaft of morning light from the clear story windows, and the bay looked almost serene if someone ignored the sound. Dawn hated that optical lie. Dangerous systems often looked calm right before they took their payment. Halverson stuck his hand out toward her chest. Give me your panel credential and clear my station. You already have my key on the ledge. Your credential card. She pulled the card from her jacket pocket, looked at the name strip, then held it in her closed fist. You can remove me from controls. You cannot compel me to certify unsafe restart. I don't need your certification. You asked for it at 6:12 when you wanted a fast close-out packet. Her voice stayed level. You do need a qualified startup signature for legal defensibility. If you bypass that, log it as supervisory override and own the chain. He leaned in, finger aimed at her badge. Do not talk to me about legal defensibility. Then don't create criminal exposure in front of witnesses. A collective intake of breath moved through the nearby crew. Nobody spoke. The hiss from Zone 2 whistled higher as Eli nudged the selector and pressure crept to 1060. Dawn saw the leak fan tighten into a thinner, brighter arc. Mechanism confirmed in real time. Higher pressure, finer jet, longer throw. She turned her head toward Eli. Hold, right now. Eli swallowed. Sir? Halverson snapped. Continue ramp. Dawn took one step toward the yellow stripe, but did not cross it. Eli, listen carefully. That plume is no longer diffuse. It is forming a coherent jet. Coherent jet means concentrated kinetic energy. If it strikes skin, glove, or loose fabric, you may not feel full damage immediately. You report it once, and you do not hide it. Do you understand me? I understand, Eli said, voice thin. Halverson fired back. You are not his supervisor anymore. No, Dawn said. I'm the only person here naming the hazard accurately. She lifted the thermal camera again and captured a third frame. The cold trace was now a clear slash across the flange circumference, and she read the numbers out loud as she recorded audio annotation. Frame 064122, delta T at leak path, minus 7.8 Celsius, relative to adjacent metal. Spray envelope widening. Audible frequency increase with pressure ramp. Halverson gave her a contemptuous glance. You think pictures will save you? They will save whoever has to explain this later. The operations desk came back on radio, uncertain. Line 4, we have your no-start statement. Supervisor status? Dawn answered before Halverson could grab the handset. Supervisor is ordering continuation against declared hazard. Halverson lunged for the radio cradle. She pivoted, keeping the handset out of reach without touching him. Do not put hands on me, she said loud enough for the bay to hear. Witnesses present. His face flushed dark. You are done. Effective now. Removed from duty pending insubordination review. She nodded once. Log it with timestamp and the words, refused unsafe restart. He barked a short laugh. You don't dictate my paperwork. Physics will. He turned to the crew, voice amplified by anger. Nobody takes instruction from Cooper. She is offline. Eli has control authority. Maintenance stands by only. We finish this cycle and recover schedule. Dawn moved to the side of the console where the laminated emergency procedure cards were mounted. She tapped the card labeled High Pressure Leak Response, then read the first line without raising her volume. Immediate isolate and depressurize. That's your own posted rule, Rick. That card is guidance. It is policy. It is guidance when operations demand judgment. She stared at him. This is judgment. Bad judgment. By 6:42, the smell of oil sharpened again, and Dawn noticed tiny droplets collecting along the underside lip of the mezzanine support above the manifold. Aerosol deposition had moved vertical. That meant concentration in air had climbed enough for widespread wetting, not just local plume. She keyed safety channel one more time. Safety desk, Cooper again. Upgrade advisory to active exposure risk. Request occupational nurse standby for potential injection response and inhalation triage. A different voice answered this time, brisk and guarded. Nurse notified. Need supervisor confirmation for dispatch to Bay. Dawn's eyes stayed on the leak. If you wait for confirmation, you are choosing delayed care. No reply. She clipped the radio back and exhaled through her nose. Controlled anger, controlled breathing, controlled words. Panic scattered facts. She needed facts intact. Halverson extended his hand again, palm open. Credential card now. She placed the card into his palm. There. Access removed. Liability not transferred. He folded the card, then tucked it into his jacket pocket like a trophy. Get off my floor. I'm remaining at designated witness distance until relief arrives. You don't set terms. I don't leave a junior operator alone with a live high-pressure defect and a supervisor in denial. Eli spoke without turning. Pressure 1100. Halverson nodded. Continue. Dawn addressed Eli, each word deliberate. If you feel impact, sting, numbness, heat, or unusual pressure in your hand or forearm, declare medical immediately, even if skin looks normal. Injection injuries hide. Minutes matter. Halverson slammed his palm on the console rail. Stop poisoning him with worst-case stories. Worst case is what happens when you call a jet missed. The maintenance tech finally set his torque wrench on the floor with a metallic clink and raised both hands where everyone could see them. I'm not touching live bolts. You can write me up too. Halverson rounded on him. Then stand down and shut up. Already standing down, the tech said. Dawn felt a brief, grim respect for him. Small refusal, clear boundary. In a plant culture bent by schedule panic, those moments were rare. The pressure trend climbed to 1,140 and then paused as Eli adjusted ramp rate. The hiss had become a fine, hard scream, nearly ultrasonic at the edge of hearing. Dawn could feel it in her molars more than her ears. She took a slow step backward, keeping line of sight while increasing standoff. Two operators mirrored her movement without being asked. She spoke one final time into operations net, diction crisp. Final warning from certified startup lead. Continuing above current pressure with active coherent jet at zone 2 creates immediate fluid injection hazard and secondary ignition pathway. I do not authorize restart. This statement is entered at 6:43. Halverson answered over her transmission, voice clipped and icy. Counter entry. Startup continues under management authority. Cooper removed for refusal to perform assigned duty. The desk operator acknowledged both entries. Voice smaller now. Copy both. Logged. That was the line crossing, not mechanical administrative. From this point, every additional PSI would ride on a documented override chain. Halverson pointed toward the bay exit gate. Security will escort you out. Dawn shook her head. If you call security, I'll walk to HR myself after handoff. But I'm not disappearing before this is witnessed by another qualified operator. You are not qualified here anymore. Certification doesn't evaporate because you're angry. He pulled his phone, stabbed at the screen, and spoke without taking his eyes off her. Control office, this is Halverson. Suspend Cooper's system access immediately. Flag badge. Issue temporary duty block, pending investigation. He listened, then added louder so the crew heard it. Reason. Refusal of direct order and disruption of operations. Dawn replied before he could pocket the phone. Add refusal based on active high-pressure leak and posted emergency procedure. Add that I requested isolate and medical standby. He gave her a cold smile. You can argue that in your interview. At 6:44, Shift Superintendent Marla Keene appeared at the edge of Bay A, with a tablet under her arm, moving fast but not running. Her eyes went first to the plume, then to the pressure display, then to Dawn standing off panel. She understood enough in one glance to ask the only question that mattered. "Who has control authority?" Halverson answered instantly. "Navarro." Marla looked to Dawn. "Did you refuse restart?" "Yes," Dawn said, "on mechanism and procedure." "State mechanism." Compromised spiral wound gasket producing coherent high-pressure jet at manifold flange. Injection risk to personnel, aerosol ignition pathway to preheat lane, and non-compliant live boundary operation. Marla nodded once, tight. "Did you log it?" "Multiple channels, time-stamped thermal and audio records captured." Halverson cut in. "We are done with theatrics. I need schedule recovery, not a seminar." Marla held his gaze for a beat, then looked back at the console. Pressure 1,170 and rising slowly. Aerosol sensor status flickering persistent red. She did not smile. "Rick, if this is your override, it is your name on it." "It is." "Then say it plainly." He turned slightly, making sure the nearest workers could hear him. "I am issuing management override. Continue ramp to operational standby." Eli hesitated with his hand on the selector. Halverson's voice hardened to a threat edged in steel. "Do it, or you can join Cooper in the parking lot." The words hit Eli like a physical shove. Dawn watched his shoulders tense, watched fear and obedience fight across his face, and watched him choose the paycheck in the span of one breath. He turned the selector. The pumps deepened. Pressure moved again. Dawn stayed on the witness stripe, hands empty now except for camera and radio, and fixed every detail in memory as the override became action. Because once authority forced the decision onto a junior operator, the argument was no longer technical. It was power, documented in real time, climbing with the gauge. The selector clicked through its detent, and the pump note dropped into a deeper register that everyone on the floor recognized as commitment, not testing. Dawn watched the pressure trend scroll upward in controlled increments, while the leak at Zone 2 stopped looking like vapor and started looking like geometry. A bright, narrow fan with a fixed origin and a hard edge that no one with field time would mistake for condensation. Eli kept his eyes locked on the center screen, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped near his ear. Halverson stood close behind him with one hand on the rail, and the other pointed toward the rising numbers like he was directing traffic instead of stored energy. "Rate it out," Halverson said. "Pressure 1210, Eli answered. "Keep the ramp." Dawn stayed on the witness stripe and forced her breathing into a steady cadence. She had no panel authority left, but she still had voice, and voice still moved people. "All non-essential personnel behind columns now, north aisle clear. Stay out of line of fire from the manifold." Marla backed that command immediately. "You heard her. Move." Boots scraped on concrete. 2 riggers pulled a die cart farther from the spray zone. A forklift driver killed his engine and left the vehicle where it sat, choosing distance over convenience. The bay did not empty, but it thinned enough to cut exposure. Dawn scanned for anyone still standing on the wrong side of trajectory, then keyed her radio again. "Safety desk, Cooper. We are continuing under override. Upgrade to active incident watch and stage med response at Bay A entrance." This time the reply came faster. "Copy active watch. Medical team moving." A beat later, the aerosol alarm chirped again, sharper than before, and Eli's hand hovered over acknowledge without pressing it. Don't mute it, Dawn said. Halverson answered, Acknowledge and continue. Eli pressed the key. The sound died. The warning stayed on screen in red. At 1,260 pounds per square inch, the hiss at the flange became a high metallic thread that seemed to cut through ear protection and settle in Dawn's teeth. She raised the thermal camera for another frame, and the cold streak now split into a forked shape along the gasket circumference. A primary leak path and a smaller satellite path opening beside it. Defect propagation in real time. She did not need to guess anymore. The gasket was unraveling under load. Rick, Marla said, voice low and controlled, you still have time to back this down. He did not look at her. I have time to recover schedule. That's what I'm doing. Read the plume, Marla said. It's sharpening. It's atomization from startup turbulence. Dawn answered without taking her eyes off the flange. Turbulence does not produce a coherent jet with pulse lock to pump stroke. This is boundary failure. Halverson gave a short, dismissive laugh. You two are narrating ghosts. By 6:45, dawn light had climbed high enough through the clear story windows to make the suspended oil visible as a pale veil above the line, and the smell changed from warm hydraulic fluid to that thin metallic odor of aerosol loading. The smell that told experienced operators droplets were hanging in breathing space, not just wetting surfaces. Dawn felt a sting at the back of her throat and pulled her collar higher without turning away from the manifold. Pressure 1320, Eli said. Ramp to standby, Halverson replied. Dawn took one step left for a clearer angle to Eli's right side and spoke to him, not gently, not harshly, just exact. Keep your forearms back from the console edge. If that jet tracks, fabric can wick. He nodded once, barely visible. The maintenance tech who had refused live torque drifted farther out and planted himself near a column. I'm calling this in on my own log, he said to no one in particular, then louder. Live leak under management override. Time 0645. Do what you want, Halverson said. Dawn looked at the flange. Then she looked at Halverson. Every extra PSI is a decision with your name on it. He turned on her with practiced contempt. Still preaching from the parking lot? Still documenting from the witness line. The panel updated to 1,410 pounds per square inch. The leak fan narrowed again and reached farther. A bright silver line under light, then invisible, then bright again as the pulse cycled. Dawn tracked where it struck and saw droplets pepper the grating beneath a cable tray run, then roll off in tiny beads. Another pathway opening. Marla keyed her own radio. Control, this is Keen. Confirm Deluge Readiness Bay A. Deluge in auto, Control answered. Manual pull stations active. Dawn cut in. Deluge trip is thermal. Aerosol can ignite and travel before threshold. Put a fire watch on preheat lane now. Control hesitated. Copy recommendation. Recommendation. Again. She stored the word away with the others she had heard on bad days. At 1,500 pounds per square inch, Eli shifted his stance, feet too narrow for the tension in his upper body. Dawn saw sweat darken the back of his collar despite the cool morning. He was trying to satisfy a manager, satisfy procedure, satisfy fear all at once. No operator could hold that balance long. Hold here, she said. You've crossed safe diagnostic window. Hold. Halverson snapped. Continue. Eli swallowed. Pressure 1520. The hiss from Zone 2 climbed into a piercing tone that made conversation flatten into short phrases. Dawn could feel vibration through the soles of her boots as the intensifier stroke synchronized harder under demand. She glanced at the pump vibration feed mirrored on an auxiliary screen. B-side drift had widened another notch. Not catastrophic by itself. Added to the gasket breach, it was fuel on an already lit fuse. "Rick," Marla said, "this is no longer arguable." "It was never arguable," Dawn said. "It was measurable." Halverson jabbed a finger at Eli. "Take it to 1.6. At 1,600 pounds per square inch, the jet stopped feathering and turned needle thin. It no longer looked like mist to anyone with open eyes. It looked like a bright wire thrown from steel, angled waist-high across a corridor where operators had stood 10 minutes earlier. Dawn's stomach tightened. Not from surprise, from pattern recognition. This was the threshold where bad outcomes accelerated from probable to immediate. "Everyone downrange clear," she shouted. "Downrange clear now." 2 remaining workers near Bay C moved quickly behind a structural column. One slipped on the oily sheen and caught himself against a pallet rack, then scrambled clear. Dawn keyed safety one more time. "Exposure zone widening. Repeat, widening. Keep med at entrance and prep injection protocol." "Medical staged," came the response. 2 minutes out to your position." "Make it 1, Dawn said. Eli read out, voice thinner. 1650. Halverson leaned in. "Push it." Marla stepped toward the console rail. "I'm countermanding this." "You don't have operations authority on this line," Halverson said. "I have duty of care." "Then care from back there." The argument hit a wall because the machine kept moving. Dawn watched the pressure trend and counted silently with each stroke. 1, 2, 3. She marked the leak angle against a bolt head, then against a conduit clamp, and saw micro shifts in trajectory that meant the gasket face was moving under load, not holding stable compression. She lifted the camera and caught frame after frame, each one worse, by millimeters. "Pressure 1720, Eli said. Dawn's voice cut across the bay. "Eli, listen to me. If you feel anything on your right arm, hit emergency stop and call injury immediately. Do not wait for permission." Halverson barked, "Ignore that." Eli didn't answer either of them. The next 10 seconds stretched because everyone on the floor understood, at least in their bodies, that the system had entered a narrow corridor where there was no slack left. Pump noise, alarm chirps, radio static, steel expansion pops from preheat lane, all of it layered into one continuous industrial roar. Dawn kept her eyes locked on the jet and on Eli's sleeve seam. "Pressure 1780, Eli said. 8 seconds later, the line crossed from dread into impact. The jet snapped sideways by a few degrees as the gasket segment shifted, and a bright line struck Eli's right sleeve just above the glove cuff. The fabric darkened in a pinpoint spot. Then he shouted, a raw sound that cut through ear protection, and jerked backward hard enough to slam his elbow into the jog control. The command registered instantly. "No!" Dawn yelled. The ram moved. It was only a short jog, but under load and with the die set not fully aligned, short was enough. Steel met steel off-center with a report like a struck rail. The upper die kissed crooked, caught, then sheared the edge of a retaining shoe. A fragment ricocheted into a guard panel with a loud metallic crack. Eli stumbled sideways, clutching his forearm, eyes wide, breath gone. "E-stop! E-stop!" Marla shouted. Eli's left hand slapped at the panel and missed. Halverson reached, hit the wrong key, cursed under his breath, then hit the emergency mushroom. The pumps dumped to stop command. But pressure decay in a system that size was never instant. Stored energy kept moving for a heartbeat too long. 3 seconds after the bad jog, the fractured die insert split with a deep, blunt bang and dropped skewed into the lower set. The shift in load shook the manifold support. The leak at Zone 2 widened from needle to fan in one violent pulse, atomized oil bursting into a denser cloud that rolled toward preheat lane like silver smoke. "Fire watch now!" Dawn shouted into radio, already running. She reached Eli first. He was on one knee, right hand locked around his left forearm by reflex, face drained and rigid with shock. "Don't squeeze it," she said, peeling his grip loose. "Keep it still. What did you feel?" "Like a hammer?" he gasped. "Then burning, then numb." "Injection suspected," Dawn said into her radio. "Upper forearm. Immediate surgical transport." 7 seconds after the die fracture, the aerosol cloud crossed the edge of preheat lane where hot scales spilled intermittently from the conveyor discharge. There was no cinematic pause. A pale flash raced low across the mist. Then a sharper orange flare bloomed along the bay floor and licked up a cable guard. Someone screamed from behind a column. Another operator yelled, "Fire in A!" The heat hit Dawn's face as a dry slap. She grabbed Eli's collar and dragged him backward by half a meter, keeping his injured arm elevated and away from his torso. Marla was already moving toward a manual pull station. "Pull it," Dawn shouted. Marla yanked the handle. A horn blasted overhead, strobing lights ignited red across the bay, and the deluge valves thudded open with a delayed shudder. For 2 long seconds, nothing fell. Then water hammered down in uneven sheets, slamming catwalks, turning aerosol haze into greasy runoff, driving steam and smoke upward. "Account for people," Marla yelled into radio. "Bay a roll call now." Halverson stood frozen near the console, soaked from the first sweep of deluge, eyes fixed on the fractured die, like he was still trying to reverse what he had ordered. Dawn pointed at him with her free hand. "Shut main hydraulic isolation. Manual wheel, east wall." He blinked, then moved, slipping once on the wet floor, catching the rail and stumbling toward the valve station. The next 30 seconds compressed into hard, bright fragments, water pounding steel, alarm horns pulsing. A burning patch near the preheat guard flaring, shrinking, flaring again as runoff carried oil. 2 workers guiding a coughing co-worker behind a column. The maintenance tech throwing absorbent booms from a spill cart to divert flow away from an electrical cabinet base. Control room voices overlapping on radio. Confirm casualty count. Confirm ignition source isolated. Confirm power state. Dawn stayed with Eli, knees on wet concrete, one hand supporting his shoulder, the other keeping his forearm immobilized, with a folded jacket as makeshift brace. She checked his glove and sleeve. The penetration point was tiny, almost nothing to look at. Exactly the lie she had warned about all morning. "Stay with me," she said. "Name and date." "Eli Navarro," he said through clenched teeth. He gave the date correctly. Good sign, he was shaking hard. "Any chest pain, trouble breathing?" "No, arms pressure, deep pressure. Do not bend it, do not remove glove." Medical rushed in under the deluge edge with a trauma kit and backboard. Dawn gave report in one breath. "High pressure hydraulic injection suspected, right forearm near cuff line, exposure at approximately 1780 to 1850 range. Immediate pain, then numbness, no loss of consciousness, secondary smoke exposure likely mild." The lead medic nodded, cut away soaked outer fabric around the site without probing, splinted the limb, and started oxygen. By 6:47, flames near Preheat Lane were mostly knocked down by water, but smoke still drifted in gray bands under the roof trusses. The ram sat frozen mid-recovery, die set, visibly misaligned and fractured, one retaining component missing from its seat. The manifold area hissed and spat under residual pressure and water impact until Halverson finally reached full closure on the manual isolation wheel and the sound dropped from scream to ragged whisper. "Isolation confirmed," he shouted, voice hoarse. "Lock it," Marla ordered. He clipped a lock through the wheel hasp with shaking hands, 45 seconds from Eli's scream to deluge stabilization. Lean 4 had gone from override ramp to full emergency scene. Dawn rose only when medics lifted Eli onto the board. Her legs felt heavy, not weak, just loaded with adrenaline and the weight of everything she had said that had now become evidence in steel, water, smoke, and one young operator's arm, strapped tight for surgery. As the stretcher rolled toward Bay A entrance, Eli caught her sleeve with his left hand. "You told me," he said, voice frayed. "You told me." "I know," Dawn said. "Keep breathing. Hospital takes it from here." He released her and disappeared through the flashing red wash near the doors. Behind her, alarms still pulsed, water still hammered down, and Halverson stood under the deluge with his clean jacket plastered to him, staring at the ruined line while the numbers he had chased dissolved into the most expensive 45 seconds of his career. The alarms kept pulsing while Dawn crossed the wet floor toward the incident board, boots sliding a little on the oil-water film, helmet lamp catching broken reflections off steel and runoff. Marla was already at the wall phone by Bay A's fire door, one hand over her free ear, shouting clear words into layered noise. "This is Keene at Riverbend. Press line 4. Active industrial fire controlled by deluge. One suspected high-pressure injection trauma. Multiple smoke and heat exposures. EMS transport in progress. Initiating full incident command." She listened, answered 2 questions, then turned and pointed at Dawn. "I need names, locations, and who is in envelope at the moment of ignition." Dawn nodded once. She did not trust her voice yet. She took a grease pencil from the board tray and wrote the first line in block capitals. "Eli Navarro, Console, injection suspect right forearm." Then she listed the others she had seen pulled from behind columns and out of the north aisle, marking each with observed condition only, no guesses. Cough, minor burn to glove exterior, eye irritation, slip and fall impact. No head strike. Facts first, interpretations later. Halverson came back from the isolation wheel soaked through, breathing hard, his white hard hat streaked with gray runoff. "We contained it," he said, as if speed could shrink consequences. "We contained it in under a minute." Marla didn't look at him. "You had ignition in an occupied bay. Containment is not the headline." Dawn wrote one more line beneath the names. Line 4. Status. E-stop activated. Manual isolation closed. Lock applied. Do not energize. She signed and time-stamped it at 6:49, then circled the time twice. On bad days, time became evidence. Within 2 minutes, the first wave of internal responders arrived in orange helmets and splash gear. One team laid absorbent booms to divert oily water from floor drains. Another placed portable barriers around the manifold and the shattered die area. The lead responder asked the standard chain of custody question. Who has first source images before suppression? Dawn raised the thermal camera. I do. 4 thermal frames, 2 annotated audio clips, and visible light video from 641 forward. Do not power cycle that device, he said. Your primary evidence custodian until transfer form is signed. She clipped the camera to her chest rig and felt, for the first time that morning, a small point of steadiness. The warnings were no longer only in memory. By 7:03, the deluge tapered to intermittent sheets, and smoke thinned enough for a full accountability roll call. Marla read names from the Bay roster, voice clipped. No wasted words. Every worker answered. No one missing. Dawn watched shoulders drop across the group by a fraction when the final "here" came back from the far column line. Then the medic supervisor gave his own count. 7 transported or referred for treatment from Bay A, 1 high-priority surgical transfer, 6 non-critical for smoke inhalation and superficial thermal exposure. Numbers, not rumors. That mattered. Control room requested a verbal sequence for the preliminary incident report. Marla handed Dawn the radio. You were closest to mechanism. Keep it technical. Dawn keyed up. Sequence, active leak at Zone 2 upstream manifold flange observed during startup ramp. Formal no start declared and logged at 0640. Management override entered at 0643. Pressure continued from approximately 1,170 to 1,780 pounds per square inch. At 1,780 plus 8 seconds, coherent jet shifted trajectory and contacted operator sleeve near glove cuff. Startle response coincided with unintended jog input. Ram moved into misaligned die set, causing die fracture and retaining shoe shear. Expanded aerosol encountered hot scale near preheat discharge. Flash fire initiated, manual pull activated. Deluge engaged with short delay. System isolated manually at east wall valve. End sequence. The control operator repeated her words, back line by line, then said, quieter. Copied. That's clean. By 7:20, the bay looked less like an emergency and more like a courtroom made of steel. Yellow tape boxed the manifold die station and console. Investigators from corporate EHS began photographing every surface. Dawn stood beside a folding table while an evidence clerk logged her files. Device serial number, file names, timestamps, hash verification, transfer signatures. She watched the clerk seal an evidence drive and label it RB-L4-0623-thermal. Physical evidence resolved, preserved, traceable. Halverson tried to walk past the tape toward the panel. An investigator blocked him with a flat palm. No entry until scene release. I'm operations manager, he said. Today you are a witness. The sentence landed harder than shouting had. At 8:05, HR and legal assembled in the temporary command room off Bay B. Dawn sat with a paper cup of water she had not touched. Jacket still damp. Hairline gritty with dried mist and dust. Across from her, Halverson had changed into a spare coat, but not into a different posture. He kept repeating variations of the same minimization. The alarm had nuisance tripped before. The leak appeared minor. Production urgency required discretion. Each claim met a document. Marla slid printed logs across the table. Aerosol sensor persistent red before continuation. Reliability engineer Thomas Ivers added another sheet. Deferred work order from last week identified the same flange location. Ultrasound flagged micro chatter. Replacement kit request marked urgent. Expedite denied. Legal counsel asked, denied by whom? Thomas pointed without looking up. Operation Sign-Off, Rick Halverson. The room got very quiet. Dawn did not look at Halverson. She looked at the timestamp in the corner of the printout and matched it to her memory of that meeting. This was the delayed consequence finally surfacing. A paperwork choice made to save freight and schedule now welded to injury and loss. At 9:12, the hospital called Incident Command with the first surgical update. Eli had undergone emergency debridement and pressure release treatment for fluid injection trauma in the forearm. Limb perfusion was preserved. No amputation indicated. Dawn closed her eyes for one breath and let that sentence pass through her like clean air. Preserved was not unharmed, but preserved meant he had a chance at function. The same call confirmed the other 6 workers were stable. 3 treated and released after oxygen and observation. 2 with minor first-degree burns. 2 exposed skin near collar line and wrist. 1 admitted overnight for smoke irritation. Monitoring due to pre-existing asthma. No fatalities. Riverbend had escaped the worst category, and no one in that room pretended it was luck alone. It was partial evacuation, plus fast manual pull, plus crews who moved when warned. By noon, damage assessment teams had first-pass numbers. Dawn joined the walk-down in loaner boots because hers were contaminated for lab testing. The die set looked like a broken jaw, upper segment chipped and skewed, lower pocket gouged. 1 servo manifold face showed clear erosion tracks near the failed gasket seat. The console's jog keycap was cracked from impact. Cable tray insulation near preheat had blistered along a 2-meter run. No single component told the full story. Together they formed a straight chain of cause and effect. Finance rep Layla Chen read estimates from her tablet. Immediate equipment and recovery cost, $1,870,000 and climbing. If manifold block replacement is required, add $220 to $290. Total likely above $2 million. Halverson started to interrupt. That assumes full replacement. Layla cut him off without raising her voice. That assumes metallurgy confirms heat compromise. We will know after lab. Dawn looked at the broken die, then at the clipboard where someone had written, saved expedite freight, $9,400 on the prior week's purchase note. Dark irony required no narrator. At 1340, state workplace safety regulators called for formal notification details. Legal put the phone on speaker in the command room. The investigator asked plain, hard questions. Was a hazard reported before restart? Was restart continued under override? Were workers exposed within hazard envelope? Were procedures bypassed? Dawn answered when asked, each response anchored to log entries, not emotion. Yes, hazard reported before restart. Yes, continuation under management override at 6:43. Yes, personnel remained in envelope at time of event, despite clearance efforts. Yes, required isolate and repair sequence bypassed. The investigator paused, then said, preserve all communications, maintenance records, and access control logs effective immediately. Our team will be on site tomorrow. External contact resolved. No ambiguity. By the second day after the incident, Line 4 remained locked out under joint hold from EHS and regulator order. Dawn returned to site for interview number 3 and walked past a production board where the quarter-close target still hung in green marker beside a red handwritten note. L4 down. No ETA. The board looked smaller than it had on Monday morning. At 10:15 that day, insurer representatives toured Bay A with clipboards and a forensic engineer. They spent 20 minutes at the manifold, 10 at the console, and almost an hour reviewing override logs and radio transcripts. Dawn was not in their meeting with executives, but by late afternoon the summary reached command staff. Preliminary coverage accepted for worker medical and emergency response costs. Property loss claim on major equipment reserved pending determination of procedural compliance. Possible denial if willful bypass confirmed. Conditional language. But the direction was clear. 3 days later, conditional turned to concrete. The carrier issued a formal reservation of rights letter citing documented supervisory override against declared high-pressure leak and posted response card. Dawn read a copy in legal's office. One paragraph did the damage in careful legal prose. Loss amplified by deviation from mandated control procedures. Insurance did not negotiate with hindsight. It negotiated with documents. By the end of the first week, shutdown planning settled into hard numbers. 19 days minimum for Line 4 returned to certified service. Provided replacement manifold face and die components, passed acceptance tests, and full startup witness protocol was followed with regulator present. 19 days of missed throughput at Riverbend's current contracts translated into penalty exposure across 3 customers, each clause tied to late delivery windows measured in hours. Sales estimated 7-figure revenue deferral before week 2 even began. Dawn sat in the reconstruction meeting while planners moved magnets on a board to reallocate jobs to lines 1 and 3. It helped, but not enough. Line 4 handled the heaviest forgings. Without it, bottlenecks stacked through heat treat and shipping. Schedule pressure had caused the override. Now schedule collapse became the bill. In week 2, formal citations arrived from the state. Willful violation for continuing operation after hazard declaration. Serious violation for failure to fully clear non-essential personnel from the active hazard envelope, and records violation tied to inconsistent incident coding in the first internal draft. Legal challenged wording on one count and accepted the rest. Fines were substantial, but not the sharpest edge. The sharpest edge was the classification. Willful changed everything. Insurance posture, board response, public filings, and individual liability. On the 9th day after the fire, the board's audit committee froze executive bonuses pending forensic completion. The memo was terse. Performance incentives suspended due to safety governance breach and material operational loss event. Dawn saw a printed copy taped beside the union notice board, and no one tore it down. In the same window, Eli began occupational rehab consults. He could flex 2 fingers with pain, grip strength minimal, sensation patchy but present. Dawn visited once with Marla, stayed 10 minutes, and talked about practical things. Follow-up appointments, workers' compensation paperwork, modified duty options if he wanted them later. No speeches. He nodded, tired but alert. "You weren't wrong," he said. She answered, "Being right was never the goal." By day 19, Line 4 passed witnessed pressure hold at 1 times operating pressure with new gasket set, verified flange flatness, recalibrated aerosol sensors, and revised startup interlock that converted persistent aerosol red from advisory to hard inhibit unless 2 independent authorizations were entered with automatic safety notification. The machine returned under stricter logic because steel had forced the lesson into software. That afternoon, final preliminary loss accounting circulated. $2.06 million direct equipment and recovery cost. 19-day partial plant shutdown. 7 injured with 1 critical injection case. 3 customer penalty clauses triggered. Insurer denial on the largest property loss component due to documented bypass. And open regulatory enforcement action with potential personal charges for reckless endangerment and records falsification. Dawn read the sheet once, placed it face down, and looked through the command room window at Bay A, where fresh paint covered scorch marks, but not memory. Rick Halverson's office was already being cleared by facilities when she walked past. No ceremony, no argument, just a cardboard archive box, a deactivated badge envelope, and a typed notice taped to the glass. Terminated for cause, effective immediately. Physics had issued its own performance review, and this time no one could call it missed. The morning after Halverson's office, Glass got that termination notice. Dawn sat in conference room C with a binder thick enough to stop a door, and the forensic lead from corporate EHS clicked to the final reconstruction slide. The room smelled like coffee, damp paper, and the faint solvent note that clung to everyone who had spent time in Bay A. On the screen, the sequence was laid out in synchronized tracks. Pressure trend, aerosol sensor status, radio transcript, thermal frame timestamps, and badge access logs. "This is the closure meeting," the lead said. "No speculation, only verified chain." He pointed to the first thermal image Dawn had captured at 6:29, the knife-thin cold line bright against the manifold face. Defect existed before override. Next slide. The 0641 frame with the forked leak path. Defect propagation under pressure. Next, audio waveform with the rising high-frequency hiss. Acoustic shift corroborates boundary failure. Then he froze the clip at 6:43, management override entry, Eli at controls. Dawn removed. Decision point. Nobody in the room challenged the sequence because every source matched the others to the second. Physics had built its own witness stack. He moved to evidence disposition. Thermal camera files transferred to evidence drive RB-L 4-0623-thermal, hash verified. Device returned to operations after custody closure. He slid a signed form toward Dawn. She read her name, serial number, and return timestamp, then signed. Read startup tag and lock from control key guard archived as Exhibit 12. Another form, another signature. Eli Navarro's sleeve and glove, logged by hospital chain as medical forensic material, retained per statute. Fractured die segment, sheared retaining shoe, and cracked jog keycap sent to metallurgy and controls lab. Reports issued and attached. Oil water samples from Bay A drains confirmed hydraulic fluid migration. Environmental mitigation completed. Discharge permit deviation closed with no off-site release. Physical items resolved. Nothing lost in a drawer. Nothing hand-waved away. 3 days passed before the state inspector convened formal testimony in the training auditorium. Now repurposed with recording mics and legal placards, Dawn took the witness table in work boots and a clean jacket, hands flat on laminate scarred by years of safety classes. The inspector asked for the same chain she had given on day 1, and she gave it again with the same words: observed leak, declared no start, required procedure, override, exposure, unintended jog, ignition, deluge, isolation. Then counsel asked about the details managers usually called minor. The aerosol sensor was read before continuation? Yes, persistent red with manual acknowledgement. The hiss changed pitch. Yes, narrowed and intensified with ramp pressure. You observed oily haze near electrical cabinets? Yes, and slip sheen near Bay C, reported both by radio and visual. Deluge delay. Manual pull occurred. Water delivery followed after a short mechanical lag. Logged. The inspector nodded and marked each answer against the transcript already on his screen. When he asked whether Dawn could have prevented the event after authority was removed, she answered without drama. No operator can physically prevent an override once control authority is transferred. I could warn, clear people, and document. I did all three. The maintenance tech who had stared at his wrench in part 2 finally finished the sentence he had swallowed that morning. His name was Jalen Price, and he spoke with both hands wrapped around a paper cup he never drank. I got told Friday to stand by for a live snug if startup ran tight, he said. I knew it was wrong. I didn't file because I thought it would get buried and I'd get marked difficult. He looked at Dawn once, then back to the inspector. When she said line of fire, that snapped it for me. I refused because she was right. The die cart operator who had laughed once and then gone silent also testified. His laugh, he said, had been fear masked as compliance, and he had spent the rest of that shift moving farther from the manifold without admitting why. Eli testified by video from rehab, voice steadier than his hand. She warned me about the cuff seal and injection signs before it happened, he said. If she hadn't drilled that into me, I might have hidden it. I would have lost the arm. By the first Monday of the next month, Riverbend's board held a disciplinary hearing in the same executive room, where quarter targets were usually celebrated. Halverson appeared with counsel, tie too tight, eyes bloodshot, and for an hour he tried to recast the override as operational judgment under schedule pressure. The board chair did not raise his voice once. He simply walked the signed documents in order. Deferred gasket procurement with expedited freight denied. Red note reliability warning acknowledged. No start declaration logged. Override entered. Post-incident coding draft altered. Then corrected after audit trail recovery. You didn't make one bad call, the chair said. You built a chain and then tried to file it as weather. Counsel objected to phrasing. The chair ignored the objection and read the vote. Termination for cause upheld unanimously. Bonus forfeiture confirmed. Indemnification denied for actions outside policy. Legal followed with notice of referral to state prosecutors for reckless endangerment and records falsification. Halverson opened his mouth, closed it, then signed receipt of the decision without another word. The hierarchy he had weaponized ended in a signature line. 2 weeks later, Dawn stood in county court in the second row behind Riverbend counsel while Halverson entered his plea. No cameras, no spectacle, just fluorescent light and a clerk reading case numbers. The judge accepted a plea to reduced counts with probation conditions, fines, and a prohibition on supervising safety-critical industrial operations for the term set by statute. The records falsification count remained on his file as part of the agreement. When the judge asked whether he understood that these rules existed to prevent exactly this kind of injury chain, Halverson said, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice that had none of the mezzanine's swagger left. Legal consequence resolved without another blast, exactly the kind of delayed reckoning that hurt companies more than a single fireball. Insurance premium shock, contractual distrust, regulator scrutiny, and a reputation tax applied to every future bid. That same afternoon, insurer representatives delivered the final property decision in writing. Worker medical coverage and emergency response costs were paid. The largest equipment loss segment stayed denied under willful bypass exclusion. Finance set the number on the table in black ink. Riverbend absorbed the multi-million gap directly, then booked customer penalties on top. Layla from Finance read it aloud once, then tapped the margin where the old expedite fee sat in archived procurement notes. Saved $9,400, she said, not smiling. Lost more than $2 million direct, plus penalties, plus premium increase. Dark irony did not need embellishment. On a clear Thursday at 7 a.m., Bay A reopened for a controlled training startup with regulators, union reps, and the full crew present. Dawn stood at the panel again, credential reactivated, nameplate polished, but hands still work-worn. Before enabling pressure, she held up 3 objects inside clear evidence sleeves: a copy of the old red tag, a photo of Eli's punctured sleeve cuff, and a printout of the thermal cold line. "These are not props," she said. "These are what warning looks like before headlines." She walked the revised logic. Persistent aerosol red now hard inhibited the ramp. No single manager could override without dual authentication and automatic safety dispatch. Lev torque near active high-pressure boundaries explicitly blocked an electronic permit flow. Medical alert protocol auto-triggered on declared injection risk. Marla read the checklist item by item. Jalen verified isolation points allowed. Eli back on modified duty with a brace and a guarded smile. Observed from behind the stripe and gave a small nod when Dawn reached the cuff hazard section. The room was quiet, not fearful, just disciplined. She turned the key only after every signature was on the board, then brought pressure up in measured steps with no leak, no hiss shift, no aerosol red. At 900 pounds per square inch, she paused and looked to the regulator. He checked his tablet and said, "Continue." At 1,200 pounds per square inch, stable. At 1,500 pounds per square inch, stable. At 1,850 pounds per square inch, the manifold held clean, gauges steady, and the only mist in Bay A was water vapor from a distant cooling line nowhere near the hazard envelope. Dawn logged the hold, then powered down on schedule. Procedure had done what procedure always did, when allowed to finish. At shift end, she returned the training sleeves to the safety cabinet, signed the lock sheet, and shut the door. Every call had an outcome. Every report had a callback. Every strange detail from that morning, the pitch change, the cold line, the sensor chatter, the oily haze, the slip near Bay C, the delayed deluge thud, sat in final findings, no longer dismissed as nerves. The people who had hesitated said what they knew. The people who had minimized the risk were removed or sanctioned. Eli kept his arm in his future, though on a different path. Dawn walked back through Bay A under steady lights and normal machine noise. And the rule that closed the file was the same one that should have opened it. Call it missed if you want, but at 1,850 pounds per square inch, reality does not negotiate.